there's a lot of different things that can come up within health in terms of terminology and the types of appointment you'll go to. So one of the challenges is to find a range of good sources for researching and interpreting assignment. So for example, if you do get an appointment or you get your invite to the exam and it says you're going to be in a particular situation and you want to do some research about it, where do you go to? So arguably nowadays, when you're thinking about researching terminology, for example, for a glossary or ahead of an appointment, the first thing that people think about in terms of research is doing it online. You know, that's certainly if I heard a term or a phrase or any subject at all that I wanted to research, the first place I would go to is an online resource. I'd go to Google search engine or a similar one, and I'd type in the words and see what I could find. So for example, if I was researching medical terminology, I'd go to Google or another search engine, and I'd type in healthcare or medical glossaries or something along those lines. In fact, if anyone's, as I go through this, you'll probably find out that I'd probably type in NHS website as a first port of call for that one, because that's one of the best resources in my opinion. The problem is, if you put in something like healthcare into a website or into a search engine, you'll get back loads and loads of different content, and some of it will be good, some of it won't be. So my advice, first of all, because there's so many different websites, you know, with these kind of titles in them, my advice would be to start with official bodies such as the World Health Organization, WHO, the NHS, National Health Service, of course, NICE is another good one as well. So these official bodies generally will have more reliable information. It's always good as well to use these kind of services, and particularly things like the NHS website, because the NHS website is designed for patients to read, not for the doctors to read. So it explains things really well to sort of a common person like myself, so they'd be able to understand it. So that will also give you a good idea of the kind of terminology a doctor would similarly use with that kind of patient. You want to avoid being too vague and using terms that are too general. So again, the examples that I gave there, healthcare glossary, something like that, are a bit vague. So you'll get literally probably thousands, if not millions of different hits on there. You'll get far too much information. I mean, one of the first things that you might want to do in terms of that is, unless it make it less sort of general, is to put UK in. Because of course, as well as healthcare glossaries for the UK, if you just put healthcare, then you're going to get US sources as well. And then there's probably even more US resources than there are UK resources, which is fine in some ways, but you have to be aware that sometimes the terms and the conditions that they use in the States, in the United States, in America over there, are different from the ones that they use in the UK. So if you've spent all your time revising a US glossary, you might find there are some differences when you actually go to provide interpreting. So always try and focus on the UK first of all. You might also want to focus on a certain branch of medicine. So things like a cardiology glossary, if you are researching for a cardiology appointment, is going to give you a better result than just a general healthcare. I've already mentioned the localizing your search to the UK. But of course, then you can combine those two things and you can go for cardiology glossary UK, which will make it even easier to hit the right kind of information. Don't just limit yourself to one website. Explore what else is there and be creative in your search. You might want to cross-reference things. You might even want to search for glossaries or dictionaries in your other language to see what they've got in there as well, so you can compare and contrast. And certainly when you're completing your own glossary, you might want to look up those terms in the other language as well, so that you can put your explanations in there and your interpretations, or even possibly paraphrasing. So even though online is a fantastic resource, don't forget about more traditional ways, such as referring to medical dictionaries as well. I would say if you are going to use any particular medical dictionaries, avoid very old dictionaries because terms change. Even the science itself does get updated. So if you get a particularly old dictionary, it might have incorrect information, things that we've now learned that they didn't know then. So maybe they were putting the information that they thought was correct and it's actually changed. But certainly things like medical jargon, abbreviations will have changed over time. So that's something to be aware of if you're looking for those. So if you are going to look for a paper dictionary, try and use the most up-to-date and concise dictionaries. But again, remember that ideally you want something for a lay person rather than expert. So don't try and find a medical journal aimed for people who are studying medicine at university, because that's probably going to include a lot of words and phrases that you will never have to interpret. But actually, it'd be better to look for sort of first aid manuals that someone might get for the home, and information that explains it in lay terms so that they'll be able to understand it. It'll also help you to understand it better, because it will be written in a language or in a way of speaking that you will be able to understand better than these expert journals and things like that. Don't just limit your research to the creation of glossaries, but as well as that, you'd need to remember the terms and understand what they mean and how they should be used. So rather than just getting a list of lots and lots of words and trying to memorize them all, try also to learn about the certain conditions that that word might be used in relation to. So again, like I was saying earlier, if you're looking up cardiology, for example, think about, okay, what kind of conversation would the professional be having around this? Will we be talking about symptoms? Will they be talking about the kind of lifestyle somebody is living as well, and how they would contribute to the condition? So again, you don't need to read it to an expert level, as I keep saying, but just make sure you've got a general understanding and you can recognize the words and phrases that are likely to occur when discussing a certain condition or procedure. And the example role play that I sent out last week, it can be helpful in that, because that'll give you a real idea of the kind of conversation that will happen. But again, use your own personal experience. Think of situations when you've been to the doctors and the kind of conversation you've had. Sylvie's just asked on a chat message whether you should try and explain a condition, but you wouldn't actually explain a condition in interpreting assessment, or not assessment, sorry, assignment or assessment, in fact, if it's your exam, but because that's the doctor's job to explain the condition. If it's a case where there isn't an equivalent word or phrase in the other language, then you might want to paraphrase, and that sort of borders on explaining a condition, but it wouldn't be an in-depth explanation. It'd just be explaining what that word means, really. So you sort of keep it down to that one, or you'd be using your own cultural expertise as an interpreter to use a more common version of what the doctor said, that you know that the patient will understand better than the official word. So there are words, medical words, of course, that a doctor might use that would lose someone even in an English to English conversation. So the patient might have to say, oh, I've never heard that word. What does that mean? But in an interpreting situation, the same sort of thing. If we were talking with another group, I believe it was another group anyway, about diabetes, and in some cultures, they wouldn't really use the word diabetes at all. In the UK, we use it all the time. If someone said, I've got diabetes, most people understand what that is, because it's quite a common, well, it's very common for people to get it, and it's quite common for people to talk about it. So there's a good level of understanding around that word. But in other cultures, they might say, I've got the blood disease, or I've got blood problems, and they'll talk about it as in blood, as opposed to the phrase diabetes. So again, the interpreter might want to use that because they'll know the person will understand, rather than the actual word, because there's a better equivalent, we would call that. But again, it wouldn't mean that the interpreter would then launch into an explanation of what it was. If the patient didn't understand, it would be up to that patient to then ask a question of the professional, for you to interpret that question, and then you to interpret the explanation the doctor's given. So just to go back to the range of sources, other sources could include things like peer-reviewed medical journals, medical magazines and videos. But again, I'd be careful with medical journals or magazines and who the audience is, really. You don't want to go into too in-depth, because you'll be learning a load of phrases that you'll never need. Videos can be really useful. But again, be careful with US videos. If you go on YouTube or something like that, then if you're finding videos about certain conditions on there, and there are loads of them, then just be careful, because the majority of the content is US content. So you have to, again, be careful. I mean, again, you can still watch them, because the general information will probably be the same, but you might want to cross-check it afterwards. But certainly if you're looking for films and videos, you can also look into television programs that are UK-based. Things like 24 Hours in A&E is quite good, because it's all based on real life. It's a documentary-style program. So the kind of conversations that you hear are actual conversations and words and phrases that people actually use in that situation. There's also things like TV dramas, like UK-based ones, again, like Casualty or Holby City, that have been long running, and they cover a wide range of different different situations. But because that's a drama rather than based on real life, it's not exactly the same as it would be in real life. They will have made it slightly different. It might not be quite as accurate either as well. So you just need to be aware of that.